to how do I think my lesson went? I think it went very well. I think that kind of what we talked about in our debriefing session when kids were engaged. I think they were engaged through Little Wayne and through the concept of showing the X Men in a room. I think that went really well actually. And so and from a numbers perspective, 96% mastery. So um, they got it, which was great because one step equations is pretty important. So, what about
Okay.
you? How did you think it was went?
Um, I think my lesson went good. I tried to break it down in a really, really simple way. I tried to color code things so they would understand it better. As far as engagement, I think that the students were very engaged. They really wanted to learn the material as well as please me, of course, which is always great. Taking a look back at the data and the exit tickets, I only had one person to make a perfect score. I gave them three questions, which was exactly aligned with how I taught them, what I taught them. Um, in the classwork that we did, but only one person made 100 because there were only three questions. If you miss one, you have about
Right, 60.
yeah. So it's not that great. However, one student just copied the problem wrong. He got two right, and then the third problem he copied wrong. But even though he copied it wrong, the way he solved it was correct. Another student made a mistake on the mathematical part. And then the other student, the third student who did not make 100, she she accidentally plugged the wrong number into the variable.
Mhm.
So with that being
It's
said,
kind of careless mistakes, not
yeah,
necessarily mastery.
it was careless mistake as far as mathematical operations such as adding and subtracting incorrectly or forgetting to borrow. There was only one student out of all of my students who actually maybe had more of a misconception of the standard because they actually plugged in the wrong number into the variable.
Mm.
So I don't know if that was a mistake as far as not paying attention, or if that student really did not truly understand what we covered in class. Um, but I guess going back to you, um, how were your students engaged, and what would you do differently?
Yep. So again, there was two kind of different like work period activities that I used. The first one was this sort of reciprocal teaching style where you had students playing different roles, and going into it, I hadn't really thought about some of the mistakes that or some of the confusions that they would have as seventh graders um, taking part in or like investing in like this reciprocal teaching model where they had to play different roles, and so I found myself kind of explaining it a lot more than I anticipated. So kind of like for next time, making sure that I am very specific and explicit with the roles within the reciprocal teaching model. That's the first thing, but I will say that it did go well in terms of like allowing students to kind of walk through the process of solving one-step equations and conceptualizing it from starting all from numbers and variables starting in one room and going to the other. Who do you think is going to leave? Who do you think is going to stay? What do you think that person? What do you think the variable is going to become once that person leaves? And so that was really easy to for them to kind of like digest and really talk about. The other activity that I had was this little Wayne activity where it was a riddle, and
You told me
the
about that.
riddle
How did
was
it
it
go?
was great. It was what did little Wayne say to the seventh grade scholar? And I found a lot of my students were like really eager to like solve the problems and find the words and figure out what the word was saying to them to figure out the message. And it was a little corny on my part, but I think that that corniness was definitely something that really
Well, what did
incentivized
he
them.
say?
Money with two Y's. Um, so it was, I just saw my students really engaged and really interested in doing the math. Now, assessing that activity, I made my answer key and the box with all the answers in a manner that showed me common mistakes that a lot of my students make. And I did say my mastery was 95%, 96%, but um, what I did notice was the questions that my students got wrong, both on the exit ticket and the work period activity with Little Wayne, was not necessarily understanding the concept of moving isolating the variable, moving all of the numbers from one side to the other, do inverse operations. But it was again going back to the thing that a lot of my seventh graders struggled with, which was adding and subtracting positive and negative integers. So that was one of my students in particular. She very smart girl, but still not subtracting when you have different signs and so forth. So that's kind of showing me that they got the material, they understood that lesson, but that we have to kind of go back beforehand and still address some of those adding and subtracting gaps. And what was the last part?
Well, what would I do differently?
Oh yeah, what would you do differently?
I think what I would do differently is review a little bit more. When I came into the lesson, I came in and I did a brief review on order of operations. I touched on it and it explained it, but I think I probably should have required them to take notes concerning order of operations. Therefore, it could stick in their mind a little bit more because I believe that the lesson that I taught that day was pretty simple and it was kind of easy for them to understand. However, I think the common mistakes would be one that would definitely catch them on exams and the CRCP, as far as not executing order of operations correctly. So even though it's something they already knew, I probably should have went more in depth of order of operations and instead of a 5 to 10 minute review, maybe a bigger review, made them take some notes and did a few examples because it seems like they're still struggling a little bit with order of operations. And with them being seventh graders, unfortunately, they still do not know how to multiply to grade, which is something that we're definitely going to have to work on as a math department in a whole. So I guess for do now, I could have probably gave them some multiplication problems, just multiplication drills to strike that skill up a little bit more.
As far as a turning point in the lesson, I would definitely say actually after my opening, I think that me being able to conceptualize for them the picture of isolating an X-Man and moving the numbers to a different room, keeping the X-Man in that room, with like the tool being the opposite of inverse operation, really was the turning point for them to say, oh, that's how you do it. And so they were really directly able to align that with any numbers on a paper, with just having that visual and having that hook. And I found myself always being able to go back to that. Well, you have these two different things in a room, a variable and a number with a sign in it. Which one is going to go in the other room? And it was a hook that I really was able to kind of go back to when some students were having difficulty. So I think at the onset of my lesson, that was my turn.
Okay. When teaching my lesson, the turning point, I guess I would have to say, is there was a turning point when we did order of operations, when I did do the quick review, and I explained to them that it's multiplication or division, not multiplication, then division. That was a turning point because it was the aha moment for them to realize which one comes first, because there was a common misconception within the news lesson that I taught them. The turning point for them was when I actually drew the diagram on the board. And I put the x variable and I put the equation, and then I drew a line that pointed to where it went, and then I wrote the sentence out again, the equation out again, replacing the variable with the actual number, so they can see how it replaced itself. But my lesson was pretty simplistic. I mean, if you see an x, and it says x equals 3, you replace that x with a 3. And so it was pretty easy far as getting them to understand what they're supposed to be doing. As long as they pay attention, the only difficulties is getting them to remember the order of operations and to multiply correctly.
Overall, I think I was successful in teaching the objective, and make that my students learned, and I saw student achievement and mastery of objectives.
I definitely agree. I believe that my students were engaged and they wanted to learn, which is always a plus when you're teaching seventh graders. And they seemed like they were interested and wanted to be able to tie in the lesson to a real life situation.
Yeah.
And they were able to express and communicate their real life situation tied into the lesson to me as well as the classroom. And they were able to work in groups effectively and efficiently without any problems or disturbances. So I think that they did pretty good.
Another high five.
Sure.
Yay. This?
Mm-hmm.
Or this?
Mm-hmm.